Something just broke inside the media, and no one's talking about it. In this explosive podcast, a top Trump regime critic reveals how cowardice, silence, and fear are letting a second-term Trump go unchecked. We've pulled out 10 brutal takeaways you won't forget. One of them will change how you see the press, maybe forever. Keep watching. Takeaway 1. Media normalized authoritarian behavior. In Trump's second term, many major media outlets continue to treat his authoritarian actions as though they are just part of standard political debate, instead of clearly stating the threat they pose to democracy. This ongoing normalization allows dangerous behavior to spread further without accountability. Instead of calling out lies or racism directly, reporters still use watered-down terms like racially charged or controversial, which hides the seriousness of his agenda. The podcast discusses how this kind of hedging creates a false sense of balance, giving credibility to things that should be condemned. Some journalists still fear backlash and accusations of bias, so they frame Trump's statements as just another point of view. This has made the public more tolerant of things like climate change denial, election misinformation, and outright xenophobia. For example, even now, many outlets avoid flatly stating that Trump's claims about mass voter fraud were lies, which only helps keep those falsehoods alive. Now let's move to the next takeaway. Takeaway 2, fear-shaped political journalism. In Trump's second term, the media continues to be shaped by fear. Fear of being denied access to government, fear of being labeled partisan, and fear of losing viewers or readers. This fear has kept many newsrooms timid, even as Trump consolidates power more aggressively than before. The podcast points out that Trump uses this fear against them. He constantly spreads lies, knowing the press will either report them neutrally or pair them with weak disclaimers. This turns news coverage into a platform for disinformation. And the fear isn't just personal, it's institutional. Outlets that rely on revenue from ratings or social media algorithms are especially vulnerable. For example, when Trump labeled the press enemies of the people, some networks responded not with outrage, but by softening their tone in hopes of avoiding his wrath and staying in the room. Now let's move to the next takeaway. Takeaway 3. Journalists were complicit, not neutral. The media has not just been passive during Trump's rise and return, they've actively enabled him by refusing to confront the full truth. What's framed as neutrality has often been complicity. The podcast puts it bluntly. The media didn't just fail, it helped him. Instead of covering Trump as a serious authoritarian threat, too many outlets still treat him like a provocative celebrity. Headlines soften reality, describing crackdowns as moves to restore order, or describing purges as reshuffles. For example, when Trump forced out dozens of government officials in his second term's first 100 days and replaced them with loyalists, some media outlets called it asserting control, instead of labeling it what it was, a power grab. This language matters because it trains audiences to view authoritarian behavior as ordinary politics. Now let's move to the next takeaway. Takeaway 4. The GOP enabled Trump every step. Trump's grip on the presidency and his expanding powers wouldn't be possible without the constant support of the Republican Party. After backing him through his first term, the GOP fully embraced his second term by sidelining internal critics and following his agenda without question. The podcast calls this a complete moral collapse. Republican leaders who once warned about Trump now justify every move he makes, from defying court rulings to punishing dissenters. Even as Trump uses the Department of Justice to investigate political enemies and purges federal agencies, most GOP lawmakers either praise him or remain silent. For example, Lindsey Graham, who once mocked Trump's character, now defends his actions at every turn and says Trump is the most important Republican leader in history. This blind loyalty enables Trump's authoritarian push. Now let's move to the next takeaway. Takeaway 5. Trump is enacting his revenge agenda. Trump is no longer just planning revenge, he's carrying it out. In his second term, he has launched investigations into former rivals, slashed funding to states that oppose him, and fired officials who resist his control. The podcast makes clear that this is a presidency fueled by score settling. Trump has already begun removing career public servants and replacing them with ultra-loyal MAGA figures. Agencies like the FBI and DOJ are being reshaped from within to follow his personal commands rather than uphold the law. For example, Trump signed executive orders allowing him to bypass civil service protections, making it easier to fire thousands and install political loyalists in key roles. The deep state purges he once hinted at are now policy. We're halfway through the video. Thanks for sticking with us. If you're enjoying it, hit the thumbs up and share it in your WhatsApp groups. If you'd like to support us, please tap the thanks button below. It helps us keep making great content. Drop a comment and don't forget to hit subscribe for more. Now let's continue with the video. Takeaway 6. Political journalism needs a reset. The current state of journalism is failing under the weight of old habits. In the face of Trump's second-term authoritarianism, many outlets are still clinging to outdated ideas of balance and neutrality. The podcast says this approach no longer works. Journalism needs a reset. Reporters must shift from covering strategy and polling to focusing on threats to the Constitution and democratic norms. They should stop trying to both sides issues like the erosion of voting rights or the punishment of dissenters. For example, when Trump calls for expanding executive powers to bypass Congress, the media should stop treating it like a normal policy disagreement and start calling it what it is, an authoritarian tactic. Clarity and courage should replace caution. Now let's move to the next takeaway. Takeaway 7. Trump exploits media hunger for drama. Trump knows the media thrives on conflict and spectacle, and he continues to use that to his advantage. His second term is full of provocations, outrageous claims, and personal attacks, not just because they reflect his style, but because they keep him dominating the news cycle. The podcast explains that chaos is Trump's brand, and journalists still fall for it. Instead of focusing on outcomes, they report endlessly on his latest outburst or rally. For example, Trump's threats to lock up governors and mayors who defy federal policy got blanket coverage, even when those threats had no legal basis. The repetition made the absurd seem possible. This constant coverage helps him stay in control of the narrative, even when it works against the press itself. Now let's move to the next takeaway. Takeaway 8. January 6th was just the beginning. The Capitol insurrection on January 6th wasn't an isolated event. It was the opening act of a broader strategy that is now unfolding in Trump's second term. The podcast points out that the warning signs were ignored, and now those same patterns are being repeated at a higher level. Trump has shown he's willing to use force, legal or not, to maintain control. He has pushed law enforcement into more partisan roles and encouraged state-level crackdowns on dissent. Many reporters still downplay these actions or treat them as isolated controversies. For example, Trump's deployment of federal agents to suppress protests in cities that vote Democrat has received less scrutiny than it deserves, even though it mirrors tactics used by authoritarian regimes worldwide. Now let's move to the next takeaway. Takeaway 9. Democracy depends on honest journalism. Without bold, honest journalism, democracy will collapse under the weight of misinformation and abuse of power. The podcast makes it clear that the stakes are now higher than ever. Neutrality is no longer neutral when one side is attacking democratic norms. Reporters need to defend truth, not just report statements. They must fact-check aggressively, expose lies, and name threats. For example, when Trump claims that judges cannot overrule him, the media should not just report that claim, they should immediately show how it violates the Constitution. Every unchallenged lie pushes the country further from democracy. The press must act as a line of defense, not a passive observer. Now let's move to the last takeaway. Takeaway 10. Media must abandon outdated norms. The tools and assumptions of traditional political reporting are no longer fit for the reality of Trump's second term. The podcast argues that if the media doesn't adapt, it will be complicit in the decline of democracy. Fairness doesn't mean giving authoritarianism a platform. Access journalism, where reporters soften coverage to stay close to power, is now a direct threat to the public. Reporters should not worry about alienating politicians who are dismantling institutions. They should worry about failing their audience. For example, when Trump bans reporters from press briefings or threatens to shut down unfriendly media outlets, news organizations should not quietly comply. They should report that as an attack on press freedom, not just a political tactic. The time for tiptoeing is over. Here is a brief introduction about Susan Glasser. Susan Glasser is a seasoned American journalist and staff writer at The New Yorker, where she pens the weekly column Letter from Trump's Washington. With a distinguished career spanning top editorial roles at Politico, Foreign Policy, and The Washington Post, she has reported extensively on U.S. politics, foreign affairs, and global conflicts. Thank you for watching. If you'd like to support this channel, hit the thanks button below. It really helps us keep going. If you enjoyed this summary, please leave a like and share it in your WhatsApp groups. To join discussion about this video, drop a comment below. And for more videos like this, hit the subscribe button below.